All right. Thank you for tuning in. This is Ryan at Disruptive Radio, Disruptarian.com, March 2nd, 2019 at 4:20 p.m. We are broadcasting from Hilo, Hawaii. It is Hawaiian time, minus 10 UTC. We come every Saturday to spin music and talk with you, talk story. So every Saturday at 4:20 Hawaiian time, tune in to Disruptarian.com. We broadcast with full DCMA licensing through live365.com. We have some great music to share with you. A few of the tunes that we share, like yesterday's show, was skinhead reggae, skinhead music, variety of skinhead, oi music, reggae music, rocksteady, all that. And today we're going to talk a bit about punk. Now, punk is a topic, it's always disputed. What is punk? Who was punk? Is that punk? Is this punk? Are you a poser? Are you trendy? Blah, blah, blah. What is this? What is that? Always this, back and forth with old punkers that, maybe they were into pop punk. I would say Green Day, things like that. Rancid, things like that. Rancid got closer to the heart of punk than pretty much any of these new poppy bands did. But, I remember, when we weren't satisfied with the music, we just make our own. And I was blessed enough to be in a couple of bands. Kid that I met in Seattle named Jello is what he went by. His last name was the same as Jello Bartholomew from Dead Kennedys. But he went by Jello, and he had a band called Fucko. So he was teaching me to play some instruments. This kid, at 19 years old, had learned to play all the instruments in the band, and he had taught basically everybody in the band how to play. So I did a little bit of backup singing. I played a little bit of guitar. I wasn't great at it. I'm not great at a lot of musical instruments, but I did like to sing. So when I got to Spokane, a kid named John Crow, we'll just call it the John Crow Band, he was basically almost identical to the musical characteristics of Jello or of Charles in Seattle. But he taught everybody to play. Everybody, was it John, Jake, and the heck was his name? Anyway, I don't even remember. It was 20-something years ago now. But we liked Minor Threat. That was a good band. Sort of punk, sort of skinhead, sort of emo core, I guess people had called them in different magazines. Fugazi, also an Ian MacKaye band. When I was a kid, we got into a lot of ska came our way because we had Stretch Armstrong in Provo, where I grew up. We had Swim Herschel Swim, also in Provo Orem area. And they were all ska, kind of, skinhead reggae. I don't know, lots of skinheads went. I guess I was 12 when I went to see their first show. It was Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, Skank and Pickle, Swim Herschel Swim, and Stretch Armstrong in Provo over by Smith's in this like ballet rec center thing. But that was my first exposure to real good music, to a live concert. It was my first live concert, and it was actually kind of coincidental. It was kind of favorable that I missed Jane's Addiction, which I love Jane's Addiction and Perry Farrell and all the rest, but like they're so common, they're so kind of poppy and feel good type of music. They would be more like candy punk or pop punk, right? Still good, but my friends decided not to take me. They filled their car up, and I didn't have any room to go with them. My family, they were too poor to take me. They didn't have the ability or the time, so I got stuck with the Jane's Addiction ticket. But then the following weekend, I was able to score some tickets. My grandma hooked me up, and I got some tickets to that concert. Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, Skank and Pickle, Swim Herschel Swim, and
when the rhythm of the drums starts
Skank and Pickle, Stretch Armstrong, Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, Swim Herschel Swim. Yeah, so those four. Anyway, yeah, that was my first real concert, and I was blessed. After that, I got introduced to all kinds of different oi skinhead and other reggae music. I think I fell in love with Peter Tosh music when I was 17, shortly after, getting acquainted with skinhead music and oi music and ska music. Really fell in love with Peter Tosh, bought his album, Legalize It. It was kind of like the greatest hits of Peter Tosh, if anybody's familiar, of course. So the fascination to become a DJ, I mean, I think it really struck me when I watched Pump Up the Volume when I was a kid with Christian Slater and anyway, I can't remember all the actors, but it was a good show about pirate radio, FM broadcasting. He had the FCC after him. He's broadcasting all this stuff. People were committing suicide, and it was really depressing, upper middle class neighborhood. And they always say that with affluence comes suicide. So the richer neighborhoods, it seems to be, coming from those neighborhoods more, from more affluent households that come, that have these suicidal issues, whether it be mollycoddling, whether it just be, life is too easy, or whether they find conflict because of their status or position. But, it does, I don't know why, but it does seem like the upper middle class types are killing themselves more. I did a show on this last weekend, actually, last Saturday, because I kind of blew up at a classmate that I went to high school with, or junior high with anyway, and he just seemed to be cruel for no reason. And this stems from a direct interaction with him in recent years. But I kind of was like, I can't hold on to things. I got to let things go. Right now there's static in my heart. I just got to, vent this. And I did, and I went way overboard, but I really cussed him out. And I think this show, leading up to this show anyway, because I announced in November that I'd be doing this in February. My first show would be February 2nd. I think leading up to that, I had some discussions, and I noticed some things on social media about punk. And, people try to, now that they're adults, claim they were punks when they were kids. And I'm wondering to myself, what is punk, right? What is punk? And I read in the Urban Dictionary, it's the only way that could really define it perfectly. Punk. A guy walks up to me and asks, "What's punk?" So I kick over a garbage can and say, "That's punk." So he kicks over the garbage can and says, "That's punk?" And I say, "No, that's trendy." So, that's basically the circle that those conversations go in. What is punk? There's a much deeper description here, and I really like their history that they talk about, whether it was this band, Iggy Pop, the Stooges, Velvet Underground, Johnny Rotten, Sex Pistols. I used to get into all of that when I was a kid. I'd get kicked out of school for wearing Sex Pistols shirts just because it had some, implication of sexual innuendo, even though that was just a band name. It was just there to shock people, to disrupt people. So when I think of punk, that's the word I think of, is disruptive. That's why I have the website Disruptarian. And let me just find the description of disruptive. And I'll just read it verbatim. Disruptive. Causing or tending to cause disruption. Synonyms: troublemaking, troublesome, unruly, rowdy, disorderly, undisciplined, attention-seeking, riotous, wild, turbulent, more. Oh, there's more. Anyway, those are the main ones. And then this one that I like the best: innovative or groundbreaking. Breaking a disruptive technology into the market is never easy. So I go with both. Like as a kid, definitely. As a punk, I was 14 years old. I had a big ass 5.5 by 4 inch spider tattooed on the side of my head. I got a whole bunch of those tattoos that I got at that age then. My friend Eirik hooked me up when I was just a teenager, going to Provo High School in 9th grade. And, he was a tattoo artist and, just an anarchist and just a, really good guy. Like I also met up with him later when I moved to Seattle, but I met him in Provo, Utah, and he gave me a spider on my head and social distortion tattoo on my chest and Zorlak bat tattooed on my back, just all this stuff. I've still got all these tattoos. Some have faded. Some I actually had laser surgery to clean them up because I was a professional in the robotics industry for about 10 years. Medical robotics. But so I don't know, I was disruptive in the first definition, causing or tending to cause disruption, for many years, and I guess I still do that, especially when I run my mouth and get emotional and blast somebody, and sometimes that happens. It's a rare occasion for me now, but it does happen. But for me, like innovative or groundbreaking, like I've always tried to do that. Like before Bitcoin came out, you can see my website, xcannabis.net. It was on xcannabis.com, and I've reserved that for another purpose. So I have xcannabis.net. But I started with Cannacoins or Cannapoints before there was Bitcoin, and mine was a digital currency, but I also had set up a digital market. So instead of paying advertisers, I got the word of mouth out telling people that I would give them free Cannapoints, which they could use to buy in our store hemp clothing, like hemp jeans, hemp shirts, hemp twine, and bullion, copper and silver bullion, some Ron Paul coins, some Bitcoins later on that were just, minted at a minting factory, not anything government-based, but just, just basic like challenge coins. And we had all that in our store, so if people came and watched a video or commented or wrote a post or contributed content in some way, we would pay them in points, and then they would buy off our store, and we would send them the items, the merchandise out of our store. And that was in 2008. Bitcoin came out in the end of 2009, at least it was announced then. And I got in roughly 2010-ish, and by 2013, I had already made the first cryptocurrency real estate exchange in September of 2009. No, it was last of August 2019. I actually have it on my xcannabis.com, or I'm sorry, my xcannabis.net website, where I had talked about how useful it was in the market, how useful cryptocurrencies was. And I bought a $3,500 acre and a half property in Northern California. I sold it on eBay for cryptocurrency only, either Litecoin or Bitcoin. I made that same price, $3,500, what I paid for it, but in Litecoin, in cryptocurrency. And by November, Litecoin went from $2.78, which I had over 1,200 of them at that point, to $80. And I cashed out some at $60. So I made, a fortune off of just that one sale of that property. And I was one of the first, if I wasn't the first. I don't know of anybody else yet who has done that, but I recorded it on video. You can see my eBay transaction ID and maybe even still see that post on eBay. I'm not sure, but I took video of the whole transaction showing it. And I like to be innovative. I like to demonstrate that market. And if I wouldn't have demonstrated it so much, like when I got in a car accident, we basically lived off cryptocurrency for 2 years. I was, hammered in a million pieces in a wheelchair, and so we lived off our cryptocurrency. And had I not, I would own about $77 million worth of cryptocurrency right now, because how much it's gained in the market since I started in 2010. It would be worth a phenomenal amount of money. So at least 77 million. It could be worth more. And during the big rise in December of 2017, it would have been worth 400 million nearly. Maybe something of that nature, maybe almost 500 million. But I used to buy off of all kinds of places. I can't remember the outdoor store. I've got it all on xcannabis.net. If you just look up Litecoin or Bitcoin on xcannabis.net, you'll see those transactions. So I like to be disruptive. I follow a libertarian principle. I have many liberals, many progressives, Democrats that disagree with me. And they didn't always. I used to support Ralph Nader. I used to have a lot of the same positions, at least a lot of the same people that I supported that they did. But then I went and I found Ron Paul in 2012, and I went gung-ho on libertarianism. Like, I've always been fairly libertarian, but I'm very pro-life. Like, I don't think that, killing a baby in the womb is any less murder than killing a 40-year-old man, for no reason or for an inconvenience or for whatever. I mean, unless it's self-defense, I just don't believe in it. That's just my position. So I get shunned a little bit on the left, and then, on the right. For many years, ever since I was 14, 15, I've been very pro-legalization of cannabis, or at least nullifying all of the dumb laws that were made on cannabis and replacing it with nothing, which is why we supported heavily I-1068 in Washington and I-1149 in Washington, a little bit of Prop 19, and we definitely went balls out on the Washington initiatives, renting a lawyer's office to use their conference room for meetings. We paid people in shirts and gear and merchandise. Like, we had a screen printing store on North Division in Spokane called Emerald Sun. So we just printed out gifts for people and bought gifts from other makers and gave them rewards for getting signatures. And we got tens of thousands of signatures on the east side of Washington, not on the west side where it's very easy, but on the east, more conservative side. We got a lot for both I-1068 and 1149. And I've changed laws. They came at me in Springville, Utah, for holding a sign that said legalize it and giving out shirts. Maybe they thought I was selling them or something, but when it came down to it, my pockets were empty. I had no cash. I was simply giving away shirts to talk about cannabis, and I was exercising my free speech, just like Mike Lee, Senator Mike Lee, who was campaigning at that time, was as well. And they didn't get permits, but for some reason they made me get a permit, and it was on their law books since 1960 something, 68 or 69. And after I got arrested in June, by July 21st, I think I got arrested June 10th, 2010, or whenever the Art City Days parade was. And then by July 21st, they had a city council meeting and they had nullified that law because I went after them. I used lawyers. I used a guy named Brad from Pleasant Grove and Andrew McCullough, who I paid, from the ACLU. He was the director of the ACLU in Salt Lake at the time. And so, we just go after it. Like, we don't, a new tattoo on a 40-year-old lady or a new piercing on a 45-year-old man, yeah, that's a little bit weird, but it's not like disruptive. Nobody's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that. That is so brave. Like, that's just what people do these days. That's not brave or cool anymore. That's common, right? But disrupting the system, whether it be causing or tending to cause disruption, or whether it be innovative or groundbreaking ideas. So like a definition would be, or a sentence using disruptive in an innovative and groundbreaking way. Breaking a disruptive technology into the market is never easy. So we've done that. We've done hempdome.com, building very safe and very strong, quickly built, cheaply built homes made of hempcrete, if you wish, or you can make it out of anything else. You can put a tarp over it, but it's a portable, easily manageable, easily buildable, $300 or less home that you can make into a 500 square foot, 425 square foot home for under $300 using this dome technology that we've researched, we've published plans for, we've shown the process, we videotaped it, and we took pictures. We showed our jigs, that we had to make, just to fit, a repetitive process, to make it easier. And we tried to innovate that process and then share it with people. We have SLU2 with all of our other hemp businesses, Hemp Motor Company, where we were importing hemp oil, untreated hemp oil, and running it in our direct inject diesel with our Land Rover Defender, our 1986 2.5 liter TDI. And it ran perfectly with straight hemp oil. I didn't even drop out the glycerin or, use any sulfur or any of the other stuff to heat it and, remove things like that. I just used a 5 nanogram filter, double 5 nanogram filter, and I filtered it through that and put it in my car, and it ran perfectly, just like biodiesel. So we proved that market. We've tested and proved many other markets. And that's what I like to be as far as disruptive, or punk. Let's call punk disruptive, right? Because that's basically what punk means. In Merriam-Webster, it says a young person, inexperienced person, beginner, novice, especially a young man, usually a petty gangster, hoodlum, or ruffian. Or C, a young man used as a homosexual partner, especially in prison. 4, punk rock. B, a punk rock musician. C, one who affects punk rock styles. But see, none of those really fit it to me. I mean, punk is disruptive. That's what I think of when I think of punk. One of my first tattoos, I put it on myself, and then my friend tatted it in with a really crappy tattoo gun, but it was a chaos symbol. Had arrows going in all different directions, which is the logo of Disruptarian Radio. Now, and I've altered it so that none of their arrows or stems are straight. Like it's all different directions, but it's also, no right angles and no, no specific direction. It kind of goes everywhere. And so, I mean, that's what I see. Like, just letting nature be nature, letting humans be humans, and getting all these regulations as much as possible, as much as safely possible, out of our lives. So that's what I think punk is, you know, at least as a 41-year-old adult who was a punk as a kid, who was a skinhead and was a ruffian, you know. But let me play you a scene from SLC Punk. Since I'm from Salt Lake and since this scene comes from a movie about Salt Lake, I think it's interesting because this is where a lot of punks go. Like they're punk, 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 defy the system, rebel, you know, disrupt. And then when they get to a certain point, this kid turns like 18 and realizes, oh, wait, maybe I shouldn't. And anyway, this is kind of the sad story about punk rock in the United States these days. Really, punk is dead, but skinhead's still alive and well. Let's listen to this about SLC Punk, all right? Oi, oi, this is Ryan at Disruptarian Radio. It is March 2nd, 2019 at 4:20 p.m.
I was going to go to Harvard.
So you grow, and we're not going to let you...
What else could I...
Even though everybody else said they were wrong, like marijuana. Now look at them in Utah. Now the voters are proposing that they can grow and use marijuana for medical uses. The LDS Church is like, wait a minute. No, you can't. We're not going to let you grow, and we're not going to let you use buds. Anyway, here's this clip from SLC Punk, right?
And so there I was. I was going to go to Harvard. It was obvious. I was going to be a lawyer and play in the goddamn system. And that was that. It was my old man. He knew. So what else could I do? I mean, there's no future in anarchy. I mean, let's face it. But when I was into it, there was never a thought of the future. I mean, we were certain that the world was going to end. But when it didn't, I had to do something. So fuck it. I could always be a litigator in New York and piss the shit out of the judges. I mean, that was me, a troublemaker, the future. The guy that was one of those guys that my parents so arrogantly saved the world for. So we could fuck it up. We can do a hell of a lot more damage in the system than outside of it. That was the final irony, I think. That, and, well, this. Fuck you if you're already thinking it. I guess when all was said and done, I was nothing more than a goddamn trendy-ass poser.
All right, so that's that scene from SLC Punk. Now, he talks about anarchy, right? So where does anarchy come from? Here's another way to define punk. In an intellectual way. So who was the philosopher of anarchy? That is a man named Lynn Sanders Spooner. This is where anarchy came from in the 1800s, roughly 1865, I think is when he coined this term in one of his books. So Lynn Sanders Spooner, born January 19th, 1808, died May 14th, 1887, was an American philosopher, essayist, pamphlet writer, Unitarian, abolitionist, anarchist, legal theorist, and entrepreneur to the 19th century. He was a strong advocate of the labor movement and several anti-authoritarian and individualistic in his political views. Spooner's most famous writings include seminal abolitionist book The Unconstitutionality of Slavery and No Treason, the Constitution of No Authority, which opposes treason charges against secessionists. He is also known for competing with the U.S. Post Office with his American Letter Mail Company, which closed after legal problems with the federal government. So this is how you define punk, in my opinion. This is how punk is defined. If we want to talk about punk being anarchist, Sex Pistols song Anarchy in the UK, or any other number of versions after that of that song by the Sex Pistols. Or, you know, like in this SLC Punk, pretty famous, you know, post-punk movie talking about the culture, talking about anarchy, you know. And anarchy is pretty staple when it comes to punk. So I think that Lynn Sanders Spooner definitely envelops that. We actually have a website called capitalismtools.com. And Capitalism Tools is all about free market capitalism. You know, reducing regulations, letting people breathe. When people want to tax something in the legislature like cigarettes or alcohol or gas, they're doing it to discourage the use of those products. Don't you think that's the same for labor or for businesses or for corporations to start up? That, you know, they're taxing them to repress them, to, you know, like, why would they want to do that? You know, to me, that seems like when businesses flourish, the laborer or the worker has more leverage. And if they want the worker to be better off in the stronger middle class, you would think you would want more employment, more people in the workforce so they could negotiate for better wages. Instead of having to force people to pay those wages, even though the economy doesn't justify it, or the expense to, the cost to profit ratio, doesn't make sense for it. Like after in Seattle, when they made the minimum wage $15 an hour, many restaurants closed up, and then those people couldn't find enough work, or they were working too much and they wanted the government to kick in and help out. And I'm getting a message from my colleague here that the radio is having problems, and I have to read her message. So let me play another song for you. I'm going to play Good Guys Don't Wear White by Minor Threat.
Guys don't wear white. Every day I work hard. At night I spend a restless time. Those rich kids and all their lazy money, they can't hold a candle to mine. Tell your mama and your papa, sometimes good guys don't wear white. Bad guys, which is which? The white collar worker or the digger in the ditch? Man, who's to say who's a better man? I'm always doing the best I can, best I can. You thought I had a dirty mind, all the messed up chicks of the changing times, white filth and easy living. Come close to the love that I've given to tell your mama and your papa. Sometimes good guys don't wear white. They don't wear white. They don't wear white. They don't wear white. They don't wear white.
Right, that was Minor Threat with Ian MacKaye. Of course, that was the only Minor Threat. There was only Ian MacKaye as lead singer of Minor Threat, basically the founder of the band. What a great band. And then, of course, Fugazi. Most people are aware of Fugazi, if not in love with Fugazi. I know a lot of my friends were, long after I had met up with music from Minor Threat. People didn't put the two together. There was some political controversy with Minor Threat. And a lot of people started calling them skinheads over it, but they never really were skinheads. They're just a bunch of skaters from D.C., kind of like Henry Rollins and a bunch of the others, bunch of the old school, from the old punker days. A lot of D.C. crew. Definitely Minor Threat and Ian MacKaye and Henry Rollins, Rollins Band, Black Flag, all that. Anyway, so I'm going to wrap this up here. What I'm going to do, though, I wanted to ask you a question. Who do you think is more punk rock if we had to decide by political party? Now, it doesn't make sense to put punk in politics any more than it makes sense to put a punk in as a lawyer, like in that show SLC Punk. But, if we were to decide who is the more authoritarian, who is the least? Who is the more in favor of control and fascism, and who is the least out of the two? Would it be, the people who want to tax us more, who want to regulate our personal finances more, who want to regulate everything basically that we do, guns and businesses and all this other stuff. Is it those people who are the authoritarians, or is it those people who want to reduce taxes, who want to deregulate the government, who want to end a lot of the government agencies that are so-called quote unquote non-essential workers? You know, like people talk about the Department of Education, which has done horrible. We used to be number one in the world. 1980, they took over with the Department of Education. Now we're like number 26 in the world for scores and educational ranks. The EPA, they've done more damage. That big gold mine, they released billions, like 31 billion gallons of contaminated water into a Colorado river during when Obama was president. The EPA is worthless, and they get in more people's business and interrupt more, transactions and regular, day-to-day life essentials for people. Then they help the environment. The cost to benefit ratio is nearly nothing, right? So, I mean, there's other things that I agree with as far as ending different government agencies. Ron Paul proposed 5, and I see his reasonings there. It makes a lot of sense. But what I'm going to do, because I favor the conservative side, not everything they say. You'll hear things, they talk about the wall, and they talk about continuous wars and bases abroad. I am against all of that. I'm actually really glad to hear other Republicans reject this kind of nonsense. And now it's the Democrats wanting us to be in war all the time, in Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, and all that. But, even during Obama's presidency, he continued on 2 wars that he had promised to end, and he started 5 new undeclared wars. You talk about Libya, Syria, Pakistan, and then the Iraq, Afghanistan, and there's 2 more. Anyway, and so Libya, gosh, with the whole converting over to gold dinars thing, that was an interesting case, why they overthrew Libya. Look up why at that time Libya was choosing to quit the petrodollar and go towards a gold dinar currency. That really got him in trouble, is my opinion. But anyway, I'm going to play you the CPAC convention. They do have a lot of good points of view, pro and con, on things that I'm for and things that I'm against. The wall, I'm not in favor of. My solution to immigration is eliminate all benefits for any immigrants and their children. If the parents are immigrants, then the children are immigrants, wherever they were born. But their nation of origin is wherever they came from. Don't give non-citizens benefits. And come down on employers, but don't build a wall. That is so stupid. I'm more scared of a wall being built to keep us in than to keep others out. So I'm against the wall. I'm against continued wars. I'm against the omnibus bill that funded, almost $1 trillion of new military spending. That was a terrible, terrible deal for the American people. We have way too big of a military. And that's the end of the story for me as far as I'm concerned on that topic. Anyway, I wanted to announce a few shows that we have going on during the week before I play this CPAC convention. We have on Friday, Skinhead Reggae at noon. This is all Hawaiian time, -10 UTC. So we have Skinhead Reggae on Friday at noon. We have Talk Story that eventually we're going to start taking phone calls. I just haven't got that engineering done yet. Talk Story on Saturday, 4:20 p.m. Hawaiian time. Aloha time, Irie time. It is Irie time for me, by the way. Hope it is for you as well. And then on Tuesday, we have Utah Pirate Radio. And that's at 4:20. That's talking about, issues that I see concerning Utah in general. It won't always be pro and it won't always be con, but I do have some things that I've noticed that I wanted to talk about Utah. So that'll be a show I host on Tuesday at 4:20, Utah Pirate Radio. And then on Wednesday, we have Blazing with Buju, celebrating his release, his freedom, and his new projects that he's getting involved in. I know he's doing a show, I think in April in Jamaica, live show. So I hope he comes to Hawaii. We're going to try to encourage that and accommodate that as much as possible. I'll be, working with his people if they'll work with me, or I'll have a local producer work on it. Whatever it takes, we're going to get Buju in the islands here. We definitely need... that strength, that word, that wisdom, And this man worked on a master's degree. Buju Banton worked on a master's degree while in prison. Made a lot of progress in his life. I think he got the master's degree, and now he's working on music again. So Blazing with Buju at Wednesday, and that's 4:20 p.m. as well, of course. And just check us out through the week. I mean, I've got all kinds of different playlists and shows that I cycle through. Most of it is just broadcasting this wonderful music. Skinhead reggae, rocksteady, ska, punk rock, a little bit, outlaw country, and surf music. You know, we're going to get a Hawaiian hour going on soon with some Hawaiian surf music. So that'll probably be Thursdays, but I haven't set that up yet. But I'm going to play you what I think my version of puppy dog anarchy or puppy dog punk is this day and age. This is CPAC. So, peace. Thanks for tuning in. Disruptarian.com. This is Ryan tuning out.
They might have something classified in them. And most of these were not classified. They're with private people like Michael Cohen and Roger Stone. And a lot of foot dragging has taken place, and we still have not seen these.
Right.
And what can you now, as a minority member of Congress, do to make this?
Well, this is actually not Congress's fault here, okay? We sent these last fall to the ODNI, okay, the Director of National Intelligence, who is supposedly checking with everybody, including the special counsel, sharing this testimony, okay? Now,
Trump came into office because he understood that these are not things that are going the way we have been told they would go. In the case of Syria, if you look at a map right now of what's actually happening in Syria, you will see that this is a proxy war nightmare. The Russians, the Iranians, the Turks. There is, in fact, an area now that doesn't even get any news coverage, Idlib in northern Syria, where a group called, formerly the Nusra Group, now it's HTS, they keep changing the name, it's al-Qaeda in Syria. We're not even focused on that area. It's effectively the al-Qaeda affiliate. They've taken territory. And now there is a proxy war going on for that region. Never mind ISIS. We are not going to be out of this country for decades if we sit in place. Now, to the point about 400 troops, it was a few thousand troops. And those are the official troops, by the way. Some of you know what I'm talking about. Those are the official numbers in that country. We've drawn down to 400. This is heading in the right direction. President Trump is right on the strategy. The tactics he's been willing to talk to his advisors about and put it on a longer timeline out. But what do we think the end state is, to actually get to your question? The Assad regime isn't going anywhere. Iran isn't going anywhere. These other proxy war fighters in the region aren't leaving no matter what. We can work behind the scenes, we can work with allies, we can work with the Kurds. There's a lot that we can do without establishing a permanent military presence. Just look at a timeline of U.S. troops in Iraq, in Afghanistan. These mission sets go up, they go down. It was over 100,000 under Obama in Afghanistan. Now it's down to less than 10,000. Have we made progress there? Is this a place where any of you would want to send your children to fight? I would not want to go back because it's not a war we will win. It's a war that we can avoid losing, but that's not the same thing. We need to be honest about this. The foreign policy echo chamber in D.C. never changes its mind about anything because everyone wants to go to think tank meetings and sound smart. We cannot win these conflicts if you think that winning means rebuilding these countries for the people inside of them. Yeah. And so to your point about Syria and what we're doing there, I hope that we have no permanent U.S. military presence on the ground because I'm telling you, another emergency will come up, the Kurds and the Turks will be at each other's throats, something will happen, and all of a sudden, some of you perhaps in this audience or your sons and daughters are going to be walking around the streets of Idlib saying, what are we doing here again? Enough is enough. It has been decades already. We're done.
Yeah. So let me respond to that. So here's the thing. I understand that after 18 years of war, a lot of people are tired of war, and I get that. And people ask the question, when can we come home? And the answer is, in Buck's question, is that we don't get to decide when the war ends, because the enemy gets a vote, okay? So if we stop fighting and they don't, that's not good for America. So in traditional wars that we fought over our history, victory is pretty easy when you're fighting a traditional enemy to define. Victory is a signing ceremony on the USS Missouri when they take off their uniforms, turn over their arms, and sign a surrender document. ISIS is never going to sign a surrender document. Al-Qaeda is never going to sign a surrender document because they are, in Osama bin Laden's words, fighting a war of destiny between infidelity and Islam. So they are going to keep fighting. If we stop fighting and they keep fighting, we lose. We fulfill KSM's prophecy. So we don't get to choose when the war ends, but we do get a choice. We get to choose where it's fought. It can be fought over there, or it can be fought over here. It can be fought in the deserts of Syria and the mountains of Afghanistan, or it can be fought in the streets of New York and in the Pentagon where I was when the planes hit on September 11, 2001. That's the choice we get, and that's the only choice we get, and we got to keep fighting to make sure that those people never come back and commit the attack like they did on September 11, 2001 again.
I would offer that if that is, and that is the position that has been taken really in a bipartisan fashion now for a long time in D.C. Now we've had millions of veterans serving, come back, serving, come back. We need to set up permanent bases in Yemen, in Somalia, in Syria, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Pakistan, in the Philippines. How many places are we going to say we need to fight them over there so they don't get us over here? At what point?
Wherever they are.
At what point? Well, we're gonna have to do a whole lot of military deployments for as long as all of us in this room are alive.
That's true.
What have we gained?
I want to push back on Mark for a
Sure.
minute here, because specifically, when we all can acknowledge that it is not a traditional enemy.
Yes.
But then we are employing the definition of the enemy dictating when the war is over. So our enemies will forever be in Syria, because they're not, when you have external factors in Syria, now to that point, when you have 400 troops remaining,
yeah.
what would be your advice to the president in terms of how to go forward in this next chapter in Syria?
So here's the question that we get from people who hold Buck's side. It's like, why do we have to fight all these wars? Why can't they fight their own wars in these countries, right? Fair question. That's what we're doing in Syria, okay? So go back in history to the 1980s when one of our greatest presidents in American history, Ronald Reagan, came into office. And we were just at the end of the Vietnam era when we had deployed hundreds of thousands of troops to fight communism in Vietnam, and there was no hunger whatsoever in the American public for going out with massive deployments to fight wars in foreign countries. But Soviet communism was on the march. And so Ronald Reagan came up with a strategy called the Reagan Doctrine, which is that we are not going to go and send our troops everywhere to do the fighting. What we're going to do is we're going to send advisors and trainers to train indigenous forces to fight the communists in those countries. And so we armed the Nicaraguan Contras, and we armed the Angolan resistance, and we did this all over the world. What we're doing in Syria today is exactly the Reagan Doctrine. Our troops are not fighting, except for those CIA folks that Buck was referring to. The 2,000 troops that we have in Syria are not doing the fighting. They are mostly special operations forces, they're artillery forces, and they're forward air controllers. What we've done is we've trained up Kurdish and Arab fighters who are the ones going out and doing the fighting. The American trainers plan their missions. They provide them with intelligence and targeting. They provide artillery and they provide air cover. And the Syrian indigenous forces are doing the fighing.
Buck,
that is exactly the right strategy.
I'm going to give you the last
so
word.
Anybody who spent any time with indigenous forces and U.S. military embedded together will tell you that 400, which is the number we're talking about here, is really just a placeholder for a conflict the size of Syria. And the problem is that placeholder gets a lot larger. Remember, we were down to how many thousands in Afghanistan? Obama ramped it up to over 100,000, and to what end? Look at the troop deployment levels in Iraq. By the way, how long will we even be in Iraq? The most powerful politician in that country is Muqtada al-Sadr, who has the blood of U.S. servicemen on his hands. Some of you were in that war. You know exactly what I'm talking about. We don't have a long-term presence in Iraq. We should not try to have a long-term presence in Syria. All it takes is one incident one day. I mean, just to borrow from the point about Reagan and what Reagan was doing, we were on a peacekeeping mission in Lebanon. It's not talked about that often now. Multinational peacekeeping mission. Not a huge deployment of forces. We weren't the ones doing the fighting. We were just trying to keep the fighters apart. In Lebanon, right next door to Syria. In fact, many of the same factions that we see at each other's throats today. Many of the same groups. And then in one day, we lost almost 300 American servicemen because suicide bombers went after the Marine barracks in one day. And Reagan realized, you know what? This is a hornet's nest. We are not going to win this fight, and it's not our fight, and we left. That is another lesson of Reagan's that you should not forget.
And Osama bin Laden cited the U.S. withdrawal from Beirut as reason why he attacked us on 9/11, because he said the Americans are weak and decadent, don't have the stomach for the fight, and they will withdraw from it if we attack them. Okay. So that decision actually helped lead to the 9/11 attacks.
Unfortunately, we have to leave the conversation there. I hope we've solved the problem in Syria for you in about 20 minutes.
Fun, man.
Thank you. Have a wonderful rest of the day. And thank you to you both, wonderful panelists.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a conversation about the opioid crisis with Kellyanne Conway, Sarah Carter, and hosted by Capital Research Center's Scott Walter.
Okay. Well, it's great to be here to talk about this critical problem in America. The numbers are just stunning. CDC says the better part of 100,000 deaths a year, the vast majority from opioids in overdose cases. What is happening? Is it getting better or worse, Kellyanne?
Well, thank you, CPAC, for having me again. And I'm really glad, I'm very happy that CPAC is shining a light on this issue. The president declared a public health emergency in the first year in office. The president and the first lady both work on this public policy crisis. We call it the crisis next door because it is indiscriminate. The opioid and drug supply, drug demand crisis does not discriminate by race, by age, by gender, by socioeconomic status, by geography. It literally is in every nook and cranny in this country. As harrowing as the numbers are, the good news is the focus on more interdiction and surveillance, the focus on more access to treatment and recovery, the focus and the money that's now being given to all of those and education and prevention is starting to bend the curve in the right direction. Quickly, I'll tell you that H.R. 6 was a piece of legislation passed last year. It passed in the Senate 98-1. Every single Democratic senator running for president in 2020, albeit unsuccessfully, voted for that legislation. And I want you to remember that when they tell you that we don't need a wall at the southern border, we don't need more resources for drug interdiction, they're already on record with their vote as saying that we have a drug crisis in this country, and they voted for a whole bunch of measures, prevention, education, treatment, recovery, interdiction, surveillance, in H.R. 6. CPB and ICE have interdicted historic amounts of fentanyl. Fentanyl is an instant killer, and a tiny little grain of it can wipe us out. Little grain. And it's being laced into marijuana, heroin, meth, cocaine, and street drugs. Mm-hmm. And I want to tell the youth out there watching and here in the hall, this is not just something you can do and before. You can save a life. You can help destigmatize, break through the silence and the stigma. You're worth more than taking some street pill. You have no idea what the source of that pill is. You have no idea if it's increasingly laced with fentanyl, synthetic opioid being mainly manufactured in China and being brought into this country through different ports of entry, through our mails, and yes, illegally as well. But ICE, those who want to abolish ICE, would be giving up the 2,200 pounds of fentanyl that they interdicted over the last several years alone. And my hat's off to the brave men and women at Customs and Border Patrol and ICE for keeping us all safe with the drug crisis. Thank you.
Well, Sarah, Kellyanne brought up the border aspect of the opioid crisis. This is something you know a lot about. What do you think is some of the most important things being done at the border?
Well, right now, just the attention that we've been drawing to the border crisis is incredible. I think the administration, for the first time in my career, and I've spent the majority of my career, especially the very beginnings of my career, covering the U.S. southern border. Yeah, you know, probably all the way going back to the Daily Bulletin in California, where I can tell you this crisis has been going on for decades. This is a national emergency. Our children are dying. Our children are dying. Their parents are dying, mothers are dying, babies are being born exposed to drugs. And it's the worst crisis we've ever seen. I'm listening to Kellyanne and I'm thinking, for the first time, and I say this over and over again, Kellyanne, and I know you've got the world on your shoulders because you have focused so much on the opioid crisis and you've done so much incredible work to draw attention to that. But it's sometimes it doesn't even feel like enough. I mean, it's so big out there. I mean, I have parents who say to me, Sarah, I had no idea that there were drugs on the street that look just like Xanax, look just like Percocet, but they're actually fentanyl heroin. Our kids are having parties, and they call them Skittles parties, where they bring pills and put them into bowls, and everybody just kind of picks whatever pill they want and they take them. I mean, it's kind of a shocking thing when I heard about this, just randomly taking pills. And some of these children, unbeknownst to them, are taking a Xanax that's actually a contraband Xanax, and they're dying immediately. There is no chance to save their life. They don't make it to the hospital. It was one mistake, one time, and their lives are lost. I really think we need public service announcements. I think kids need to be told what's going on. I don't think there's enough attention to that. Please, I think this is probably one of the most important things and most important crisis of our time.
I'm just going to chime in there really quick, and I agree with that absolutely. This is one of the most important, one of the most critical issues of our time, just in that, you know, so many kids are dying. In Utah, since 2016, today is March 2nd, 2019, 11,800 and some odd kids have OD'd in Utah on whatever drugs. And prescription drugs are, you know, are so overprescribed that Utah doubles the national average of prescription drug abuse and prescription drug prescriptions in general. And the suicides, the depression, the over-medication, it's a really rough place to live. So I do focus on Utah. I do think it is a national crisis. You know, just the levels of prescriptions that are given out. I have replaced all of my prescriptions, and I had a lot. You can watch some of the videos after I got out of the hospital for my car accident, and some of those prescriptions lasted me for 3 years, especially the opiate ones. I have completely moved over from opiates to cannabis, and while I miss some of the relief that opiates give me, I feel a lot better. Like just in general, my head is clearer. You know, sometimes when I go without weed, I get the pain kind of builds up. I don't know why it builds up, but it feels like, you know, the longer I go with it, the weaker I am, the more distressed I get, and it makes me more irritable. So when I'm able to relieve it using some cannabis, which helps with the swelling and the inflammation and some of the pain relief, and it helps distract me, really. You know, I have a better, more positive point of view on the world. So I give everybody a challenge to look into that, you know, research that, and see if it might help you. Again, this is Ryan from Disruptarian Radio. Check us out on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays for live shows. You can see more about those shows at Disruptarian.com. We hope that you check out our shop. We have a few t-shirts listed to promote our shows, and we'll be putting more in there over the weeks to come. Again, thanks and mahalo.